I'm Tass Mellis of The Starters.
This is Ben Golliver with the Open Floor Podcast.
Hi, I'm Kristen Ludlow from NBA Inside Stuff.
I'm OG Anunoby of the Toronto Raptors.
Hey, I'm Elena Donon, and welcome to the Double Clutch.
Double Clutch.
Double Clutch.
Double Clutch.
Double Clutch Podcast.
There we are. Hello and welcome back to the Double Clutch NBA podcast. I am your non-usual host, Matthew Wellington, and I'm joined today once again by Nick Whitfield.
What's up, everyone? Good to be back, despite the absence of the New York Knicks from the playoffs. We'll get to that later. Still glad to be here, though.
Yeah, definitely. It's been a couple of weeks for me, or 3 or 4 weeks, I think. Obviously, I've carried the load for several years now, but now I'm taking a little bit of a break this season. So I'm on load management, back for the playoffs, chipping in with some big minutes now. So yeah, just a nice opportunity to talk to Nick again. Housekeeping and stuff this week. There hasn't been anything on the website. Twitter was fairly busy on Sunday night because obviously we had some really sort of UK friendly tip-off time. So that was good for us over in the UK. And we are looking on sort of content for the off season and things. So rest assured, we're not going anywhere. Like we will be coming up with some things. The Olympics are coming up and stuff soon, so there's plenty to be talking about. But for the next 5-6 weeks, it's going to be all NBA playoffs, and then obviously we will hit the finals hard like we normally do. I guess first off, we should probably start with around the association. Kirk, have you got your funky intro that is actually useful? There we go, fabulous. Just got to bottom my head a little bit. Thank you to everyone who's joined the stream tonight. I can see a few of you saying hello, so evening all, everybody. Right, around the association this week. This is my supposedly brief recap based on Mike Miller's not so brief recaps. Tuesday evening saw the Brooklyn Nets take their series 4-1 after they won Game 5 in the TD Garden, 123-109. Durant, Harden, and Kyrie Irving combined for 85.2 points per game in the first round, which is the most by any trio in playoff history, or in NBA history, sorry, per Elias Sports. In other random Celtics-related news, Jason Tatum had to defend his use of the word curating on Instagram as Orlando's Mo Bamba called him out, and I quote, "I know damn well you ain't using the word curating on your own," to which Jason replied, "Chill, you know I went to Duke, great education." So I just saw that midweek and thought that was interesting. Also spotted on social media this week as I was scrolling through my Instagram feed, Celtics and Timberwolves legend Kevin Garnett told the world that his mother once drew a shotgun on a recruiter, which reminds him to this day to always set the tone. So I thought that was an interesting one. How would you approach that, Nick, if you had somebody turn up with a shotgun?
Pass.
You'd be a bit intimidated. Wednesday saw the 76ers and the Jazz advance to the next round after they demolished the Wizards and Grizzlies respectively, sealing their series wins 4-1. The same night, the Mavericks took a 3-2 series lead. The same night as that, you heard the Atlanta Hawks silence the Madison Square Garden faithful as Trae Young channeled his inner Reggie Miller, taking center stage in what was effectively the series clinching 30-foot three-point shot to quiet the crowd. He took a little bow afterwards, which apparently is based on the fact that there's a lot of shows in New York. Trae Young became only the second player in NBA history with 3 straight 30-point games as a visitor at MSG in the playoffs. Thursday's early game, saw Nikola Jokic finish with 36 points, 8 rebounds and 8 assists as the Nuggets eliminated the Trailblazers in 6 games on the road. They came from 14 points down to seal the series 4-2 and advance to the Western Conference semifinals. Michael Porter Jr. in that game had 22 points in 9 minutes, and at one stage the scoreboard read Portland 28, Denver 27, which is bonkers. He had 22 of those points. Shortly after, Terry Stotts and the Trailblazers mutually agreed to part ways after 9 seasons as head coach. He's certainly been a regular Portland coach since we've been doing this podcast. Terry Stotts owned a fantastic record. He had a 402-win, 318-loss record with the Portland Trailblazers, and obviously oversaw that Damian Lillard, LaMarcus Aldridge tandem for a while. The late game on Thursday saw the Lakers' reign as the NBA champions come to an end as they were bounced out of the first round of the playoffs by a dominant Devin Booker. I'm sure Ross McLeod's around somewhere. He's probably screaming his head off right now. Friday saw the Clippers tie their series with Dallas, which obviously forced a Game 7. And the Magic parted ways with head coach Steve Clifford after 3 seasons as they look to embark on a full rebound. Steve Clifford had a 96 and 113 record as the head coach of the Orlando Magic. Saturday night saw the Bucks and Nets face off in Game 1 of the Eastern Conference semifinals. James Harden left the game early on and would not return. He's still being evaluated and I think he's doubtful for Game 2. However, his absence made no difference for the Nets as they basically walked to a 1-0 series lead. Milwaukee, from my perspective, probably got to make quite a few adjustments for that game, refocus, find their perimeter game. They were terrible from downtown. They just shot 20% from 3, which was not great. And I think they were 42% from free throws, which is awful. Sunday night saw 2 UK-friendly tip-offs, as I mentioned earlier. The first was Game 1 of the Eastern Conference semifinals between the Atlanta Hawks and the Philadelphia 76ers. Atlanta exploded in the first half, burying Philly in a 20-point hole early on. They're blaming the second unit for that today, but I think they all had something to do with it. A valiant fight back finished just short, and what gave us a crazy ending, it finished 128-124. Trae Young finished with 25 points and 7 assists again, and he's become the sort of star of the playoffs right now. Game 7 was then played at a UK-friendly time of 9 o'clock, which had NBA Twitter in a rather good mood, and it was very chatty last night, so it was great to see. And after a tense first half, the Clippers broke away from the Mavs, and a woeful Kristaps Porzingis sealing the game 126-111. The Clippers now face a semi-finals matchup with the Utah Jazz. So it's been a busy week, and I'm sure that it gets boring reading all that. But what were your favourite moments of the week, Nick?
My favourite moments of the week were mostly, in fact, I was hoping to see.
As a Knicks fan, understandable.
Yeah, not only that though. In let's address that head up. I think I can't be disappointed with this season for the Knicks because the expectations were so low coming into this season. You looked at that roster and you thought this is not a roster that can compete at the kind of upper echelons of the NBA. Completely outdid those expectations, had a really fun season, particularly picking up Derrick Rose halfway through the season, how he performed, literally becoming the linchpin for the team basically in the playoffs. It was a real fun season. And compared to seasons past, it looks like the Knicks actually have a chance of having a bright future for a change. So, obviously disappointed. But even like going into that series, the thing I kind of hadn't really noticed was how since Nate McMillan had taken over, the Hawks actually had were tied for the best record in the East since that period. So they were actually not a true 5 seed going into that series because they struggled with injuries all year. And as we've already seen in Game 1 against Philly, that is a real potent offensive combination of players they have. Trae Young really kind of finding his best form of his career. I actually really enjoy the pantomime villain stuff, so I was totally into that. I found it hilarious. That's my theories on the Knicks. I was actually hoping to watch that Game 1 against Philly and watch Atlanta get beaten down. After that, but it didn't happen. Well, it kind of happened in the fourth quarter, but Philly gave away the first 3 quarters, so didn't mean anything in the end. But
it was a strange game last night because obviously the Sixers got off to such a bad start that everyone was like, "What the hell's going on?" Like I was on Twitter at the time and people were tuning in going, "I've just turned the game on and they're down 20 points." Like, what on earth is going on? And Danny Green was getting all sorts of stick online for how he was playing, and Dwight Howard as well. Like, they were not playing well at all. And then they changed they made some adjustments in the second half and they got right back into that game. And at the end was just a constant string of what you would probably, term comedic affairs. Like, you just had players falling over with the ball. You had an inbounds pass that was stolen by Simmons and then thrown in for a layup. Like, it was just completely bonkers. And from a neutral's perspective, absolutely brilliant. They are the sort of games that, are going to help grow the NBA over here because, it was on Sky. It was, 7, 8 o'clock. That is a prime time for somebody to be watching on a Sunday night. And you just had a completely wild and bonkers ending. It was the moment. And I feel like Trae's taken over these playoffs. It's all you seem to read about is Trae Young has broken this record, franchise records, normal playoff records. He just seems to be doing everything, and that's what's made them so lethal, I guess, is the fact that they've got him, who's a fantastic playmaker in himself, but then you've got Bogdanovic, who's there as well, and you've got Herter, who's having a great game. Like, it feels like they have multiple weapons to damage teams, and that's obviously what happened in the Knicks series. You had the Knicks they kind of almost ran out of ideas. Like, Derrick Rose came in to sort of solidify them at points, but besides that, I think you could kind of tell that the Knicks were sort of a inexperienced playoff team. Like, they were, a bunch of young guys who were not necessarily, beaten by the glare of the lights, but they were struggling in that environment where every single shot counts and you have to take your time. And it's one of the themes that you tend to see in the playoffs. Like, even in game one between Brooklyn and Milwaukee the other night, Milwaukee just started terribly and they could never get back in the game. And if you do that in the playoffs, you end up in trouble. And it was the same with Philly. And, the Knicks were like that in several of their games as well. The Lakers as well. That is the theme. If you end up, struggling and you're in double digits and you have a poor game or you start rushing things, that's when these teams that are smarter and more experienced tend to take advantage of you.
Yeah, it was the things I've noticed between just speaking about Atlanta still in the series against the Knicks. Julius Randle had the worst stretch of games he's had all year in the playoffs, which was really disappointing after like an incredible regular season from him. And he also, and I mentioned it when I was last on pre-playoffs, how Randle absolutely dominated the Hawks in the regular season. So that was, pretty disappointing to see. But outside of that, the other thing, the Hawks were just like one of the worst possible matchups for how the Knicks play. In offensively, they don't have the kind of creative playmakers and decision makers and guys who can like really control a game. Because the one thing you need to do against Atlanta is exploit Trae Young's defense and like try and really make him work, get him on switches against bigs and really make him work on the other end. And the Knicks weren't able to do that at all. And it was incredibly frustrating to watch. And the thing I noticed again about Philly watching that game is their pick and roll defense was abysmal to start the game. That's why they started off so poorly, because there was numerous possessions in a row even where Trae Young would come down and be it Gallinari or Capella or whoever would set him a pick, and he would either just go straight past the defender and that was all he needed, or they would try and trap it. They would even like double straight off it, and he had one pass to an incredible shooter, be that Herter or Gallinari or Bogdanovic or anyone like that. And so the rotations were all over the place. It was only at the end where they really managed to turn it into like a physical battle rather than one about basketball, where they actually started to bully the Hawks a bit. And I'm curious to watch game two in that series to see, like, do they even start game two in a full court press to really kind of, because with the likes of Tybal and Ben Simmons and those like big, strong, long guards, that's the way you get to Trae Young. And even like you saw it in Embiid a couple of times where he plays the pick and roll really high. And just his physicality as Trae Young goes to the hoop was enough to kind of put him off late in the game. So, yeah, really, it's an interesting series to watch that one because it was so one-sided in either direction at different parts of the game.
Yeah, it might turn into sort of a pick your poison. Like, yeah, you can trap Trae, but then you're going to, John Collins or somebody else is going to score on you. Gallinari, is just turning up and making a big impact, even though many people a couple of years ago thought he was washed for some reason. Like, he's one of those guys who just consistently turns up. And it's been a general theme, like just looking across like at other games, like Dallas the other night. The fact that Luka was trying to do everything, he didn't have any assistance from anybody else. Randall was trying to do everything for the Knicks. And the Knicks all season have been one of those teams that have just, their expectations are always going to be outsized because of the market that they play in. So they get to the first round of the playoffs and everyone just seems to think that they're going to fly to the finals, but that was obviously never going to be the case. So yeah, it's been a crazy weekend really, or should I say week. There's been a hell of a lot going on. In terms of the rest of the playoffs, I mean, the surprises that are happening at the moment, if we just focus on sort of the zone right now, like would anything be surprising to you at this moment in time? Because no matter how the coming weeks unfold, we're going to see new finals winners. We're going to see new faces. It's a complete sort of tectonic shift, I guess, from, LeBron James and Steph Curry to some of the younger guys that we're seeing now coming in. Luka's dominating, Trae Young's dominating, and even someone like Donovan Mitchell, like the Jazz, after falling down in that first game when he obviously didn't play, they have manhandled the Grizzlies mostly and won that series comfortably. So they now go into what will be their first true test of this postseason. I mean, just quickly, the Nets last made it to the NBA Finals in 2003. That was back when they played in New Jersey. The Sixers last made it in 2001 when Allen Iverson was in his prime. The Jazz haven't been since 1998, and Michael Jordan did a thing. Apparently, Mike Miller's told me about that a few times. The Suns haven't been since 1993, and Michael Jordan did something again. The Bucks haven't been to the finals since 1974. That was a long time ago. And the Hawks' last appearance was in 1961 when the franchise was actually in St. Louis. And the Clippers and the Nuggets, who are also still remaining, and two very talented teams, they've never been to the NBA Finals at all. So this is totally uncharted territory for NBA fans. It's certainly uncharted territory for us. Like, we've been doing this for 8, 9 years now, and we've never seen any of these teams have a real legitimate shot at making the NBA Finals during that period.
Yeah, and one of the things I think is a big theme for this playoffs is outside of certain teams like the Nets, for example, which is like some of the biggest established stars in the NBA on one team. But outside of that, what you're seeing a lot is the emergence of the new generation of players as the kind of foremost players in the league. And a recurring theme you keep seeing is, are these like mid-30s guys actually going to be able to stay on the floor or not? Because we've seen LeBron playing through injuries. Chris Paul obviously got injured for the Suns. The Nets stars Harden goes out. Kevin Durant's been fighting injuries all year. And yet these younger guys like Giannis, like Jokic, like Booker, like Donovan Mitchell are all starting to like really perform and actually not just like put up numbers, but actually get their team through to the last stages of the playoffs. So whether this will be like a real turning of the tide in terms of who we think of as the elite players in the league, we'll see.
Yeah, it's certainly an interesting one because, like, you look at the Lakers, they obviously went all in on getting Anthony Davis a couple of years ago. They obviously went to the finals and won last year, but obviously it was a very unique one-off season that we'll probably never see again. You've had a condensed schedule this year. I think LeBron was filming Space Jam at some point during the off season, so like the guy has just not had a break at all. And the AD one's an interesting one because he's a guy who, even when he was at New Orleans, he was just always injured. He always had problems, and you partner him with LeBron, who is one of those guys who never seems to get injured, but is obviously now getting injured because he's at the tail end of his career. They have a lot to think about going forward, the Lakers. Like, how do they sort that situation out? And obviously with some of these other teams that have been bounced out this past week, you've got Portland and Dallas in particular. Like, there's players on those teams who might necessarily, they might be able to help the Lakers or vice versa. Lakers players might be able to help them. So it feels like we're at a point where you're going to have a new finals champion and you're going to have sort of new young superstars who have taken the center stage. But then you're going to have sort of a shift in terms of how a lot of these teams that have been like this, Portland have been pretty much the same unit for the last sort of 4 or 5 years. And now they're going to be having to make changes. If Denver don't get anywhere, hopefully they will, but they will probably have to make changes as well. There's a lot of teams who've got quite a lot riding on this postseason. So Dallas obviously crashed out in Game 7. Luka did everything he possibly could. I mean, he had 46 points, 14 assists, 7 rebounds in 45 minutes. You contrast that to his running teammate, Kristaps Porzingis, 16 points, 11 rebounds, 1 assist in 43 minutes. Something is going on there. And I think Kristaps has come out today. I saw a news flash on Bleach Report about he doesn't feel like he's a valued co-star. He feels like he's sort of less than a co-star. And one thing you could take from NBA Twitter last night was the amount of people slagging off Kristaps for the fact that he doesn't seem to bring anything else to the game apart from his size. As a Knicks fan who obviously saw Kristaps during his sort of prime days, the decline in his ability has been. Do you think it's down to him being injured, or do you think it's just down to the way the league's changed?
I think it's a bit of both in that. So just in terms of how he looks physically, he does not look like the same guy who we saw in New York, where one of the most exciting plays he made regularly was chase down blocks on a fast break. And you do not see the Dallas version of Porzingis physically able to make those kind of plays. The other kind of play he would constantly make for the Knicks is like put-back dunks where he'd be on the perimeter, kind of like he is with Dallas, but he'd see a shot going up, and because it's like 2 steps for him to get to the rim, a shot would be missed and he'd be above the rim dunking it kind of like 2 seconds later. So I do think there's a physical thing there. And one thing I noticed against the Clippers, I was talking about it on Discord earlier just because I couldn't shake the image from my mind of watching the game, where they were so much bigger. And I think that speaks to Dallas's roster construction as it stands now, that they felt like they had to go novelty to compete with the Clippers by having the Boban and Porzingis on the floor at the same time for like most of the game. And yet, even having those guys, both like, what are they, 7'3" or something each?
7'4", I think. Bo's banners.
Yeah,
and
they're
it's nuts.
they're getting like out rebounded by the likes of Kawhi and Paul George at times, just because they're getting out muscled from under the basket. So, yeah, I think there's a definite component of Porzingis not physically being right, but there's things like his shooting stroke, which he's not going to lose. And the thing that I find interesting is, I think it's because it was a game 7, and it's because they were kind of going win at all costs. And I already talked about with the double big lineup they're running, but also the fact that they went even more extreme into Luka has to be in control and use every single possession they have. And I mean, you saw it, he almost won it on his own anyway. But particularly when you talk about the Mavs, the thing I feel like I find a little bit frustrating on Porzingis' behalf is they could run a lot of the same kind of sets they ran for Dirk back in the day for Porzingis, because if you get him in the high post, he is not going to have his shot blocked because of how tall he is and how long he is. And I feel like, that would create a lot for Luka off the ball to get some easy shots. But Luka's a strange player in his own right, in that he can make step back 3-pointers like no one else in the league, pretty much, other than maybe James Harden and Dame and Steph. But he can't shoot free throws at the moment, which is frustrating. And I've noticed that with a few players. It's like, it feels like there's a load more than there ever was, in terms of like, normally there was always like Shaq and a few others who, like elite players who struggle with free throws. This playoffs, there's Giannis, there's Simmons, there's Luka, weirdly, who, considering what a good shooter he is generally, is inexplicable. But yeah, Dallas is a strange team, and it's hard to work out how you would improve that team because they're so dominant and focused on Luka. It may even be difficult to attract a star to play with him, because it's a little bit like LeBron, unless you're like Anthony Davis and you don't necessarily need to like dominate the ball.
Yeah.
You saw it when he was paired with Bosh and Wade, or like Kevin Love, for example. At least one star he plays alongside, LeBron, I mean, has to like take a bit of a back seat and see their numbers go right down. And I feel like Luka may be going towards that as well. And the other thing I think is like that system enables him to put up these insane numbers, but we've never really seen that kind of system win a championship in the NBA. James Harden was like that in Houston too, obviously. But yeah, I feel like they can't necessarily play like that if a championship is their goal.
Yeah, no, I agree. The weird comparison to draw is probably Kawhi Leonard when he was the Raptors. Like, you've got this one guy who is the magnet for everything on offense, and then you have to build a team around him, and it feels like that's the approach that they're going to have to take with Luka. Like, Kristaps is there. I read he was getting paid more than Giannis, Bradley Beal, Julius Randle, Jamal Murray. There's a bunch of guys that he's getting paid more money than, and it's just it's unbelievable that he's there. But he's obviously still playing off the back of his sort of Knicks days, where he was going to be the next great thing. Like, he was the unicorn, and now he obviously isn't the unicorn, and they've got to find a way of building a team around him, which is going to be difficult because you've got to find somebody who's willing to sort of take him on and his contract on. But then you look at like the build-up of this team around him. You've got Tim Hardaway Jr., Jalen Brunson, Maxi Kleber, Trey Burke. Like, a lot of those guys, if you put you sit there and you look at the rosters of the Clippers and the Dallas Mavericks, and you think this series should never be close, but somehow it was. You mentioned the Two Towers thing that Rick Carlisle obviously went to, and that worked wonders for them in a couple of those games. It just fell short last night when you had Luka trying to do everything. And Luka, for as amazing he is on the offensive end, he's still he's still a liability on the defensive end, and he hasn't built up that strength. And Kristaps as well, like for all his sort of athleticism he can bring at times, like he is not the strongest of guy, and he gets beaten about in the post like nobody's business. And you saw that with Kawhi and Paul George last night. Like those are two forwards, like, but they are aggressive and they play more like power forwards, and they will back you down and size you up and try and take advantage of that. And that's what we saw in game 7 last night. So I think Dallas have got a lot to think about. We mentioned earlier that obviously Portland went out to Denver. Damian Lillard did everything he possibly could to win that team, that series, and it just didn't work out for him. They're another team where it seems the last few years we've been discussing, does Dame and CJ McCollum work together? Now we're at the point where Terry Stotts is going. They're debating about bringing in coaches. We've seen Jason Kidd mentioned. Jason Kidd has then subsequently said, no, I don't want anything to do with it. And, after Damian Lillard said he wanted him, it was all a bit of a mess. And now you've got them in a situation where I think Cleveland have said they'd be interested in CJ McCollum and a couple of other teams. So if you're Portland now, like what direction do you go? Do you try and blow this up, or do you try and bring in someone like Karl Anthony Towns, who was mentioned the other day as being somebody who you need somebody to pair alongside Damian Lillard, who's going to help take the attention away from him all the time, I guess.
Yeah, Portland's a difficult one for me because small market team with a good team with obviously a major superstar in Lillard. There were even so Lillard posted some lyrics following their exit that some people were interpreting as like him trying to decide if he should stay in Portland or not, or whether he should leave. Which would be a shame, I think, because his whole career he's kind of been very firmly about like how much he likes Portland, how he wants to like retire with the same team and all that sort of stuff. But equally, you can see like he's 30 years old now. He may want to have a better chance of a ring, and the way Portland's roster is constructed, it feels like if you move any of their major players, you're probably not getting back value for what you're giving up. Even with Damian Lillard, I don't feel like there's a deal out there right now where you're getting anything close to how good he is back in return. And he's like a funny player where is he in the top 5? I feel like he's like right below the like best of the best in the NBA. He's like very next on the list, but he's a difficult player to trade for that reason, because if you trade for anyone below him, you're not getting value in return, and no one above him teams are going to give up. So yeah, I feel like trading him is a disaster. But yeah, Portland's one of the most difficult teams to actually improve, I think. Even when you look at who their major contributors were this year, you're looking at like they got a lot from Enes Kanter this year, and that shouldn't be the case. And I don't mean that disrespectfully. I probably do mean that disrespectfully. But if he's your like best 5, and that's mainly because Nurkic was injured for like the whole year, basically, obviously. But you're not shooting for a championship if Carmelo Anthony at this point of his career and Enes Kanter is a viable like 4 and 5 in your major lineups.
Yeah, well, that's what I guess they tried. They tried that Norman Powell experiment, and like sometimes you get 30 from Norm, sometimes you get 5. Like he's never been a consistent guy. He just sort of fits the systems he tends to play in. So
I actually hate that move as well. I talked about it a couple of times on here where Gary Trent Jr. for me, he's bigger than Norman Powell. He's more happy in his role as just an unbelievable shooter and not necessarily like a creator when you've got McCollum and Dame already. Norman Powell needs the ball more. I like him as a player, but I actually think he's a slightly worse fit for that team than Trent was.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I mean, and in the playoffs, size matters. Like that's one that if you can sit there and not be backed down and pushed around by your opponent, you're taking that. You're going to have an advantage. Nurkic was immediately questioned after the game about his future in Portland, and he said it was up for debate, which isn't a very confident answer if you're Neil O'Shea and you're thinking, I was going to bring him back. That's probably not the answer you're expecting to get from him. But yeah, Dame's cryptic Instagram reminded me of the times other players have done similar things, and then a couple of months later we've seen players move on. But I mean, Dame's one of those guys who's always said, I'm never going anywhere. I am Portland until I die. I'm going to win a ring here. He's sung about it. Like, if he moved, would anybody have any right to hate him for that decision with the way that the current sort of player power empowerment is in the NBA and, guys dictating where they play? I mean, look at Brooklyn at the moment. You've got three guys who have basically dictated a situation to get to where they've got to. And now they are, they've got, I think I saw early on their offense is the best in NBA history. Like we saw the Rockets a few years back. They had, the best at the time and it's been surpassed already. And you'll know this because of Synergy Sports, but like the isolation plays and percentages in the playoffs for the Nets was already high and they weren't playing a lot of minutes together during the regular season. Now we're in the postseason. It's gone through the roof. I think it's jumped from like 17% to 32 or something. And teams are just struggling to deal with that. And the Bucks struggled with it the other night. Like you just had Kyrie driving into the paint and then he's just making crazy whip around passes without looking. And, Durant's there to throw it down. Like they have got so many weapons. And I guess Dame's thinking I could be in a situation where I'm as good as these guys. And if I was playing with another one or two of them, we could do that. So what would your thoughts be on if he was to say, look, I'm moving? I can't see him being the sort of player who wants to force his way out of anywhere. Like, I think it would have to be the right offer. But like we've just said, I'm not entirely sure they will get the value back from him in the first place.
Yeah, I'm also not sure where it would be. And maybe it will depend, even like thinking about players on like even remotely similar contracts.
Yeah.
Let's bring up the players' contracts in. So let's have a look. So players who I could envision a universe in which their team would be willing to let them go, who are on similar contracts.
Also,
John
if
Wall
we got to
doesn't.
factor in the age here, because Dame is 30 at the moment. Like I think he's
Yeah.
turning 31 in a couple of weeks. Like, so you have to factor that in if you're trading for him.
Let's go down. John Wall, the Portland Trail Blazers do not want. There is Paul George would be an interesting one because he, as good as he is as a player, has not lived up to his contract, despite his obviously, by his own words, his MVP season that didn't happen. Jimmy Butler would be an interesting one. This is where I go. Kemba Walker. Like I go down the list, I just don't see any of these guys being traded, and the money needs to work in a trade. So it would be difficult to work. Kevin Love, that would be a fun one. Send Dame to Cleveland. See how he enjoys Cleveland.
Well, at least Kevin Love would finally get traded and wouldn't have to see his name come up in trade highlights or rumors every few months.
This one actually. If the Bucks disappointed, pairing Damian Lillard with Giannis, with Chris Middleton going the other direction, that would actually be one of the only ones I think where Middleton would still be really good in Portland, and Dame and Giannis would be a real potent combo. But this is all made up stuff.
Yeah.
This is happening.
And you're looking for a team that's effectively going to have to mortgage its future on you. Like if they're doing badly and they need to then, it'd be like when the Thunder traded for Paul George and then moved him on. Like they basically got, a whole host of draft picks back, and that's now them in their full rebuild stage. So they are at a very difficult turning point for the franchise. But people are sitting here saying the Terry Stotts era has been terrible, but like they went to a Western Conference Finals a couple of years back. Like they've had some good moments.
And this is a recurring debate is among NBA fans as well, and even like front office people, where is it better to be relevant for, let's say they're like super relevant for Damian Lillard's entire career and they watch really fun games and playoff series. Is that worse than being in a constant rebuild where they're kind of like, let's say, like compare it to a team like the Knicks, for example, where for like 8 years they've just been in constant rebuild mode where you're not making the playoffs. There's no sign of being better. I'd still rather be a relevant team. So, I feel like if they would change, it would be more likely have to be a full rebuild than a quick win option, because I don't think a quick win option is going to happen with that team.
Yeah, no, I think you're probably right. Moving on to obviously the Lakers we were touching on briefly, but your Knicks, like, do you think they need to do anything this off season, or is it just like I mentioned briefly, a case of 1 year too early and they just need to build up that experience?
So I'm actually planning to write something for the site on the Knicks, in that it's a really interesting few years because I think they're going to be opportunistic in if a star wants out and wants to force their way to New York to play in the market, they're obviously going to jump on that. But
does Damian Lillard fit that situation?
But why would Dame want to go there now where the Knicks would have to give up a huge amount to get him, at which point he's kind of on his own in New York.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
he wouldn't be in a better scenario necessarily. So I don't see Lillard actually wanting that. But the other thing to monitor is the contract situation where, because the Knicks were determined to like bottom out the roster and have full flexibility, after next season, they only have about 2 players on contract. I'm not exaggerating. Yeah. So they have to make decisions on like most of the roster as to whether to keep them or not. And nearly all of those guys have played well enough where their agents are going to be demanding more money than they're currently on. And so you have the likes of like Alec Burks, Reggie Bullock, those kind of guys who they played really well this season, but overpaying them would also be a mistake and set the team back in terms of actually getting closer to like a team that's genuinely going to be a contender. So yeah, there isn't like a right or wrong for the Knicks now. I think they also have to make a big decision on Randall, where he had a career season, but ultimately disappointed in the playoffs, and his agent is going to be demanding a big money extension. So in my perspective, the Knicks have to do that because they have to be a franchise who starts to be seen to reward loyalty and players who perform, because it's all about building credibility in the eyes of the NBA kind of at large and the player base. So I feel like they're going to have to extend Randall to big money. You're going to have Barrett coming up in a few years, who's been awkward in terms of he is very good, not a star at this point. So what kind of money you extend RJ Barrett on eventually is also going to be a big decision. So yeah, in summary, a lot is up in the air with the Knicks right now.
Yeah, well, they've managed to exceed expectations this year, so I think that puts them in good stead for the future going forward. Just touching on my Lakers really briefly. I mean, we obviously got bounced out by the Suns. It may surprise you to know, but I did actually predict this. I have my bracket, which we're obviously all doing online. I picked the Suns. I just felt like the Lakers were probably taking on a little bit too much this season with everything that happened last season and the sort of weirdness of the roster this year. I mean, you had a fight at the center and power forward position for the later half of the season. Marc Gasol was getting torched at stages in that game 6 the other night by Devin Booker, who was just basically picking on him. It was like picking on the old guy when you're playing, down the local court. Like, you pick on the guy who just can't keep up with you, and that's what they were doing. Anthony Davis should have never been in that game in the first place. He looked like he was, not capable of walking properly in the warm-ups, let alone when he actually played, and he didn't last very long in that one. And the Lakers are just one of the. They're just, I think they've thrown everything into this LeBron James era, and I'm not entirely sure it's going to work out for them at the moment. So we'll see how it goes. It's just frustrating to me seeing all these baby Lakers all over the league doing really well, and we're sort of lumbering with LeBron and an injured Anthony Davis at the moment. So we'll see what happens. But yeah, I just thought I'd get that in. Plus, I know Ross is in the chat, so it's worth talking about how good Devin Booker and the Suns were. They obviously go on to the next round now, and I think the teams that are there, I mean, if you have to pick one of them to go through, I mean, I think we actually had a question about that. Let me see if I can find it. About who would be coming out of the West. I mean, right now, you could probably pick any one of those teams and they'd have a good chance.
Was that a question?
Yeah, sorry.
So who am I picking out of the West? Is that the question?
If you at the moment with the teams that are remaining.
It's a really difficult one, as we've kind of already alluded to. Like, this is the season where everything possible that you don't expect to happen is happening. So and players are taking their game to a new level. So out of the West, I think whoever wins the Denver Phoenix series will go to the finals, because I think Phoenix I picked the Lakers over them. mostly because I was assuming health,
Yeah.
and that wasn't the case for LA at all. Obviously, Davis was a shadow of himself, and I think LeBron did not look like LeBron. So people will like say it's due to age, and that's obviously true to an extent. This was the same guy who won the championship last season. So I think he was also, and he obviously had the high ankle sprain before. And this sounds like I'm making excuses for him, but I'm just not convinced LeBron is as lessened as a player as some people seem to think at this point. The Lakers are an interesting one. And I was thinking to myself, like, I'm a LeBron fan, so I'd like to see him win at least one more. But I almost feel like with him, where he is in his career, I think I'm 4 months older than LeBron, which is always made me feel like I'm basically the same guy as him and identify with him in a lot of ways.
Similar career trajectory.
Exactly. But what the thing I'd love for LeBron is for him just to take a massive pay cut. He doesn't need the money at this point in his career. He has more money than him, his kids, and his grandkids will ever be able to spend. So money is meaningless for him at this point. And just like help the Lakers actually get some more talent in there, because I really don't really like their roster. I like LeBron, obviously. I like Davis, obviously, when he's healthy. The rest of it, I don't really like at all. So I actually think his Cleveland teams were better suited as LeBron teams, where what you don't have in LA is like the basic LeBron plus 4 shooter lineups, which were like his bread and butter for those Cleveland seasons. And you see, like, if he was on Atlanta, for example, that is a perfect roster for him, where everyone on the floor can shoot the lights out in certain lineups. Kuzma's disappointed. There was a famous, people were digging it out before the season. LeBron quote tweeted, I can't, maybe it's Bleacher or Overtime or one of those media networks, who was saying like, "Oh, which NBA player do you expect to like take the next step this year?" And he quote tweeted it saying Kyle Kuzma. It was like a passive aggressive bullying him into being a better player. But yeah,
I remember sitting here during the finals last year with Mike and actually praising him for the way he had stepped up and, you know, was playing some significant minutes and moments. But, you know, 2 points the other night is not exactly what you want when he's supposed to be this offensive threat. But Carl's one of those guys, like when you watch him, if you give him the ball and you let him have his chances, then he tends to heat up. But you're either going to get bricks or you're going to get, you know, a positive result. And you can't really risk that come the playoffs. You need guys who are effective and can, you know, when LeBron's the guy getting trapped at the half court and guys are all over him, you need somebody else who can create that. And with Anthony Davis injured, there's nobody else on that roster who could do it. Like Marc Gasol could have done it 5 years ago, but he's totally lost any form of speed and sort of I don't know if he's necessarily weakened, but he's not the guy he once was in the post. And, you know, guys take advantage of that nowadays. So Kyle Kuzma, for some reason, is always that he's always going to be that scapegoat for anything going wrong for the Lakers. Like, I think they put a lot on Taylor Horton Tucker. Like, you know, he did play well throughout the series, but you can't really rely on somebody who's just been a sort of pitch role player for most of his career so far. But like, there aren't those sort of secondary names that you get, you know, you got with the Cavs teams and you got with the Heat teams, you know, the Mike Millers and guys like that who were helping out and assisting. I guess Wesley Matthews is one of them, but again, his health's been up and down. We'll see what happens next season, but there's obviously that discord between Marc Gasol and some of the other guys and the centers there. And at one stage early on in the season, he was out of the lineup completely. So the Lakers have got quite a lot of internal discussions to have first, I think. And Dennis Schroeder said he'll be back, so, you know, at least we can run some form of a fast break next year. That actually brings me on to, I think it was Flying Tortoise who asked a question. Seeing Atlanta beat the number 1 seed tonight got me thinking, what is the most unlikeliest matchup for the finals? He puts, I think it would be Atlanta being there would be one out of the West. Mavs would be the other. So again, that comes down to this whole uncertainty that we've been talking about, the whole let's just shoot the breeze. What would surprise you? And Atlanta being in the NBA finals would probably be one of them.
Do you know what? I think Atlanta is the Mavs are obviously out now, which weren't at the point he asked that question. But I think Atlanta's the only team that would be a genuine surprise team, because I feel like if you described any of the other teams as a surprise at this point, it would be a little bit disrespectful to them because of how good they were in the regular season. Denver's was amazing. Obviously, they got the MVP in Jokic. Phoenix had an unbelievable season. Utah had the best record in the West. So the Clippers have Kawhi Leonard and Paul George. So, and obviously are very deep too. So yeah, I don't think obviously you can't describe Brooklyn with their talent level or the Bucks with Giannis, and they've had the best, not this year obviously, but they're coming off seasons of having the best record in the NBA even. So yeah, I think Atlanta's the only real surprise team left.
Yeah, I'm going to throw these questions in here because it seems like the relevant place to talk about it, considering we've probably got over some of this stuff already. But Jonas Stott asked, when watching Damian Lillard and Luka desperately trying to drag their respective teams along in the playoffs, who do you look at more and think, please, someone get them some help? And who would be your ideal help for each of them? So Luka, we were suggesting that he's going to be one of those guys who probably just needs a bunch of really good role players around him.
So I came up with, so of the two of them, I'm going to say Damian Lillard I would like help more, only because he's been facing this same problem for longer than Luka has. Yeah. So for Luka, I thought he's so dominant on the ball, so you want someone off the ball. I don't feel like he needs a dominant big, as we talked about, because of the system they run, and you're seeing like Porzingis is not even touching the ball, basically. So I have gone for Klay Thompson as his ideal person to play alongside. He's going to shoot the lights out, doesn't even need to bounce the ball ever, and can score 70-odd points in a game. So that's obviously a bit unrealistic. The more realistic, but still not going to happen pick for him, I've gone for Julius Randle, because having watched him for a whole season, I think he would be a nice fit in terms of he can really shoot the ball from the outside, so he can spot up. He can play the role I was saying they need to use Porzingis in, the Dirk role, where he can take some pressure off Luka by just dumping it into him and letting him go to work. He rebounds well, obviously. So yeah, Randle was a slightly more realistic one, but one that's still not going to happen. For who did you have for Luka?
I'm not picking another star. I'm just picking a bunch of really good role players who can play around him. So that we need some wing guys who are going to come in there that are a step up above someone like Dorian Smith. Weirdly, the guy they got rid of this offseason, I think it was Seth Curry, I think he would have really helped them in this series against the Clippers. Like, he's one of those guys who, at least if they kick it out to him, they're going to get some form of offensive production from him, and they weren't getting that from Tim Hardaway Jr. and some of the other guys who they've brought in as replacements. But I think they need to base themselves on that Toronto Raptors model that won the finals. Like, you have your one guy who's good at, Luka's going to get better on the defensive end as he gets older, as he matures, his strength's going to build. So he will become one of those guys who is similar to sort of Kawhi. He's got all the offensive skills, just needs to work on that defensive end. And then you build around him by adding sort of perimeter shooters and guys who can come in there and just do the dirty on them. So I think that's how you would build a team around Luka Doncic. You don't necessarily pair him with another star, because he's such an enigmatic presence that. And that's the problem we've had with Kristaps. Kristaps has come in, and now a couple of years on, he's fed up with it, because all the talk about Dallas is Luka. Nobody else exists in Dallas. Maxi Kleber could have the greatest season in the history of basketball, and nobody would notice, because Luka's there and taking up all the highlights every week. So you got to have guys who are happy going into that situation, and that's luckily what Toronto ended up in when they brought Kawhi in. Obviously, they traded DeRozan to bring that situation to fore. But Kyle Lowry and guys like that were willing to sort of step back and let that happen, and then they built their team around sort of one solid role player. So I think that's probably the way you would look at Luka. As for Dame, maybe you need to bring in a big who can stretch the floor and not only help set that pick and roll, but if that breaks down, he can stretch out and shoot the three. And they haven't had that. Like, Nurkic has been okay, but you need somebody who's maybe a bit more reliable. The Karl Anthony Towns thing that we floated earlier was something that was obviously flying around on Twitter quite quickly, but I'm not quite sure how that works out, especially if you're Minnesota. Like, you're under new ownership. I think Alex Rodriguez and stuff have gone in there and bought that team. Like, you're not really probably going to want to blow up and get rid of your best players. So yeah, I think it's an interesting situation, but CJ McCollum's probably the guy who goes, and then somebody fits in there. Maybe it is Kevin Love or somebody like that. But again, I don't know how far that pushes pushes him on. Right, moving on because we're running out of time. Nothing.
Just one quick one just before we get that. I went for two unrealistic ones for Dame. Giannis, just because I feel like Dame needs to play alongside a great big. And the other one, in an ultimate statement of his political power in the league, if LeBron was able to get Dame to the Lakers, I feel like that would be an insane combo. And one quick one, a player who is on big money, who his team could be, I think, convinced to move him, that would actually fit both of those players, is Tobias Harris, I think.
Yeah. No, Tobias that's a solid shout. It's just whether Philly would be willing to see how far Philly get this postseason. So nothing but Nick silly nonsense by Nick.
Nothing but Nick's silly nonsense.
Okay, I'm excited about this one. So later this month, the US Pentagon is set to release a report on UFOs. Like all alien obsessives, and like all of you, I'm sure, I'll be watching and waiting with bated breath to read this previously confidential dossier. My question to you is, from the world of basketball, who are your top 3 players most likely to have been or currently be an alien, and why?
Okay. My number one would probably be my number one would probably be Baron Davis. I mean, he claimed he was once abducted by aliens, so it would make sense that he's probably their sleeper agent and they were just getting him back. Second, I'd probably pick Anthony Davis, based on the fact that he's always injured. I mean, he's obviously not acclimatized to Earth's gravity yet, which is why he gets injured all the time. He's got a superhuman wingspan, an alien face, a monobrow. Like, it's all starting to add up. And he did like a Men in Black thing a couple of years ago, like a commercial for Men in Black, which was quite amusing. So I think he works. And my most unexpected alien presence on Earth ever would be former Oklahoma and Seattle Supersonics legend Nick Collison. I think he's the most unexpected, sleeper alien agent ever. So I would probably put Nick Collison on there because he's just a guy that you'd never expect. Like, didn't exactly light anything up in the NBA, but was always consistent, solid, present. So I'd pick Nick Collison. What about you?
Nice. I like that one. So the first two I picked are kind of linked because I picked them for the same reason, in that the aliens, it's a bit like with like the Monstars, where they come down and they see the game of basketball and they're like, oh, I see what makes these players good. But they don't realize that they're like exaggerating what human capabilities are. So my first is Wilt Chamberlain, because when you look at that guy, he's over 7 foot tall. He had records in like all sorts of sports just based on physicality, let alone on a basketball court. That is not a human being that I recognize. Similarly, Shaquille O'Neal, the guy was inhuman in lots of ways. Like, the fact there was a human being that size with that coordination and skill and all the rest of it, I cannot believe that is a human being. And lastly, this guy, I don't think, if you imagine an alien, like the classic grey, like sort of teardrop shaped head.
Yeah.
I don't think Sam Cassell ever tried to even hide he was an alien. So
he looks like he walked out of Mars Attacks.
Yeah, he really does. Great player, but didn't even try to hide it.
Oh, that's a class one. Yeah, you got the traditional Mars Attacks style aliens, or something really random and out there. I think Sam Cassell's a great shout. Talking on Discourse this week.
Like Sam Cassell autopsy video released at some point, I'm sure.
Is that what the Pentagon's going to release in a few weeks' time? Oh Jesus, that'll be a good one. Talking on Discourse this week. Discourse on Discord this week. Sorry, Nick, you're the Discord savant, I should say. So
I'll refer to myself as the Discord Don from now on. No, one chat that came up today actually was we're talking about how esports is being incorporated into the Olympics this year, which is quite exciting in Tokyo. Yeah. And there was a few opinions for you. So mine was quite like a cynical take, in that sport, I think, feels threatened by esports' potential to earn money and its draw to younger audiences in particular. And so you're seeing it across sports, like the NBA, 2K League, F1 has embraced it. All sorts of sports are like adopting it rather than trying to fight it. And so my take is that it's trying to own the income rather than fight it. But yeah, there was a lot of people also talking about whether esports kind of like needed its own event, which I think could be awesome as well. Like you can imagine, like instead of like sprinting, throwing, wrestling, weightlifting, all the like Olympic sports, whether it's like Fortnite was a thing and like COD was an event, and I can imagine that would be pretty sick. I'd watch that.
Well, they already have arenas for League of Legends and things like that in Korea, don't they? So, and I'm sure the Barclays Centre hosted a massive like esports event last year or the year before, whenever it was. So, yeah, I think esports it is them just trying to, get part of that massive market that's just exploding, especially with everybody at home. Like the gaming industry has just gone through the roof in terms of the money people are spending on it. Discord listener questions. We obviously covered a couple of these. Hooping and Looting, Blake Griffin's all-time ranking, question mark.
He's a funny one where let's get this out of the way for Elliot straight away. Blake was unbelievable in that game.
Oh, amazing.
He was playing 5 for most of the game in a small ball lineup and made like all the scrappy plays, shot the ball incredibly, like had a flawless game basically. But it's also funny now, like how far the expectations for Blake Griffin have fallen. That is a perfect game for him. Like as good as he was, but like he's was one of the elite players in the entire league for like a long time. So it's actually just quite funny now that we think of that as being such a great game for him. But yeah, the Nets in general. Just one thing, because I hate if it didn't get mentioned on the pod, was the funniest play in that game, because the Nets were brilliant in that game, and I think they're going to win that series easily. And Kevin Durant had an amazing game as well, but he had one really funny play where for some reason, he lost his concentration and just he's inbounding the ball with one hand, really kind of lackadaisical, and just throws it straight against the backboard and turns it. Watching that.
Yeah, no, that Blake Griffin did have an amazing game. His all-time ranking's an odd one because like those Clippers teams he was with obviously never really got as far as anyone expected them to get. Like my biggest memory of those Clippers teams was them winning a Game 7 against the Spurs. Like I don't remember much else apart from that, so it's probably not a good thing. And that was like 4:00 in the morning. I remember watching that game; it was fantastic. But Blake had a great game the other night. So his all-time ranking, I think, is a bit up for debate. So we probably need to move on because we'll be here forever. Do we understand Mike Miller's egg joke? I'm going to say no because it flew over my head.
Yeah, I don't think anyone does, but it does raise valid questions over the sentience of eggs and whether they are self-aware or not. Moving on. No idea. Point Wolf Ange, I think that's how you say it. With Portland failing to get through to the next round again, one possible outcome will be breaking up Damian and CJ. Where do you think CJ should go if traded? I'm going to say Philly because I like the Tobias Harris idea.
Yeah, I think he'll end up in poor old Cleveland for some reason. Bless him. Right, games of the week this week, games to watch. Nick, what's your game of the week?
I have Denver at the Suns Wednesday night because I really like watching both those teams. I think it's going to be an unbelievable series.
Yeah, those teams are stacked. I think that's probably going to be the series to watch. But I'm going to pick Clippers at Jazz, which is Tuesday night, Wednesday, 3:00 in the morning. This is the Jazz's test. They've spent the last 5 years building a team, with Rudy Gobert and Donovan Mitchell and all the guys they've built around it. Now they need to prove to everybody that this regular season they had, which was phenomenal, was no fluke. Like they need to see if they can handle the Clippers handily. I think it might go 6 or 7, but it's going to be a good series, whatever happens. And yeah, they're another team that if it all goes wrong for them, where do they go next season? Because people are already talking, saying Rudy's not the right fit, and we'll see. Right, closing. Thank you to everyone who's dropped by tonight. There's quite a few of you in the chat. Ross, Hooping and Looting, Hugh. I can see a bunch of you in there. So thank you for turning up tonight. We have new followers on Discord. We haven't had any of those this week. Articles, mentioned that earlier. We are working on some stuff. Nick's obviously just teased his Knicks article, which is probably coming at some point soon. And we are looking at content for the off-season and things. So I'm sure we'll come up with some stuff. Twitter-wise, please do follow us on there. It's at Double Clutch UK. We're on Instagram and Facebook as well. Same handle. I think we're on TikTok now, which I think is the same handle. Kirk's going to say something if I'm wrong, but I think we're on TikTok at Double Clutch UK. But thank you for joining us, and we'll catch you next week where we'll be discussing more NBA playoffs.
Enjoy playing with you guys. You guys got a lot of, well, whatever it is, you got a lot of it.